So, in this session we are going to continue seeing a few more tools that is typically used by the penetration tester for doing the client side attack. So, the tool that we are going to look at is what is called as a Nessus. So, Nessus does not come by default typically pre-installed with Kali Linux. We can actually obtain Nessus and install it as part of Kali Linux, because this is something that is available for download from the promoters of Nessus called as Tenable, right. So, they basically give you a home feed option which could potentially scan up to 16 IP addresses, and if at all the tester would need to scan more than 16 IP addresses, they could actually buy a professional license from the Tenable organization. This particular tool is actually available for a non-commercial personal use, and you could actually get an activation code if one wants to purchase by going into this particular site in tenable.com and get an activation code, after which it could basically be working without any kind of restrictions on how many IP addresses it could scan. What exactly does this tool? So, this tool is basically a tool that is typically used for scanning a particular target device. So, now when we say scanning, what exactly is done is that before that particular target could be actually attacked with certain kind of an exploits or whatever mechanism that one is adopting, the attacker should basically come to know what are all the details of that particular target, right. So, what is it that is required is that what platform it is running, that is basically what operating system is running, what version of the operating system it is actually running, other than that what kind of software applications are installed on that, and what are the versions of the software applications, right. Because just imagine that either with this tool or with some other mechanism, the person who is actually trying to attack a particular target system has these details, right. As we were discussing in some of our earlier tools, once this combination is known, that is what is the operating system running on that particular target, what kind of what is the operating system version. So, if I basically say it is Ubuntu Linux, the moment I know it is 14.04 or 16.04, and I also come to know what are the applications that is running. So, for example, Samba is running on that particular Ubuntu server, and I know what is the Samba version, let us say version 3.2.0. A very quick search is what is required to determine what are all the vulnerabilities that are present in Samba version 3.2.0 running on Ubuntu Linux version 16.04, right. Then it becomes very easy for the attacker to find out what vulnerabilities are there which could potentially be exploited by some tool like a Metasploit or whatever it is, right. So, this tool is actually going to be helping one to identify what kind of software applications are running on a particular targeted system. So, I could actually download the tool from this particular site. So, I could either download for a Debian 64-bit or for some of the other flavors of Linux also, but because we are going to be actually using it on Kali Linux, and Kali Linux is a Debian distribution, is a derivative from the Debian distribution, we would actually take this particular distribution and this particular version of the Nessus for Debian and download it, right. So, once we download this, we basically get two different compressed tar ball images. So, one is what is called as data and another what is called as control, right. So, these two things are extracted using the tar command. So, if I use the XZVF option directly with the gzip file, the GNU tar will directly do an uncompressal of it and also extract the contents from the tar in one shot, right. So, these two compressed gzipped tar files are basically uncompressed and untarred, and it will basically now have a etc and a OPT directory, right. So, we basically move all the contents of the OPT directory contents that is there into /OPT, and whatever got created under etc init.d Nessus as part of that directory into the directory etc init.d. Suppose in that particular system by any chance OPT directory is not there, so this has got to be created first, but if this directory is already present, if you do a make dir OPT make dir slash OPT, it will just report to you that this particular directory is already existing. So in this case this error could be ignored without really taking that into consideration. So after that the daemon service has to be actually started, Nessus D start, and once it is actually started it will actually be running on the port number 8834 on the local host. So one could access in the browser with this URL https://127.0.0.1:8834, right. So this will throw open the management interface in which I could actually do lot of things like trying to create an initial account. So this account is the account that will actually have the administrative control. So and also give the password and confirm the password as well, right. So once this is actually done, if at all the user wants to do a registration, so the activation code could also be given as part of the registration process, so that all kinds of limitations that is there in the free version will not be applicable in your installation, right. But if your requirement is hardly less than 16 IP addresses that you would potentially be scanning, then you could actually use the free feed itself instead of actually trying to buy a professional feed version, getting activation code and then doing a activation of that. So once this is actually created, then the login screen, whatever is a created username password has to be entered, and then it has to be actually logged in before one could actually start using that, right. Now if the first way by which this tool would actually be made use of is to do a new scan. So the new scan will actually be done on a particular URL. So that URL is actually specified here as part of the scan target text box field, and I also have an option to give a meaningful title for me to easily refer to it later, and I could also say whether I want to run it now or schedule it in future, right. Now the scan policy is whether it is an external network scan or internal network scan. Based on that the appropriate policies will actually have to be used by the tool. So instead of also specifying the URL target, I could also have a file that could actually be uploaded, which will be containing the targets that needs to be scanned one after the other in each line within that file, right. So the file also could be used by to be given as an input by choosing the file, and in pressing this button and choosing the file instead of specifying the URLs as part of this targets field, right. So once this is done, we are going to create the scan, and the scan will basically be giving a status report when it is actually running, because depending on the complexity of that particular scan and what we are asking it to do, it could potentially take any amount of time. So this will basically list down that this particular scan is currently running or it has got completed or whatever it is. So this will basically be a status tab that will say what is completed and what is currently running, and after the scan is completed, the results can be viewed by clicking on the results tab. So how does the results tab going to look like? So it is basically going to say what is the format in which I want to have the report results displayed, right. So whether we want it in HTML format or X format or whatever it is, and then when we say export, it is going to basically export the entire set of results found out as part of the scan into the corresponding format that has been given. So if you see here, so this is one example of the report that is getting printed out of the tool, right. Now the different vulnerabilities that are getting displayed here, for example if you see, right. So Microsoft Windows SMB vulnerabilities remote code. So if I know this particular vulnerability is present, and it also tries to mark the category of that vulnerability as per its own classification, right. So anything marked as a critical would essentially mean that this is something which has to be addressed immediately, or the penetration tester could easily make use of this as an entry point into this particular system, right. So the moment the penetration tester gets a result saying, for example, these many critical vulnerabilities are there, the penetration tester will know that moment this particular vulnerability, for example, the Microsoft Windows SMB vulnerabilities remote code is present on this particular server, what is that corresponding Metasploit payload that he has to run, okay, to exploit this particular vulnerability, right. So, this is basically how a tool like Nessus would be potentially used by the penetration tester from a client machine to identify and determine what are all the vulnerabilities that are there, because the moment he finds what are the vulnerabilities that are there, it is very easy and ready made information that is actually available for the penetration tester, wherein he will know exactly what exploit to basically run using a tool like something called as a Metasploit that we saw earlier, and exploit this particular vulnerability and get access into this particular system. So, that is how a tool like Nessus, which actually tries to find out what operating system, what version, what kind of softwares are running on it, and including the version of the software, helps the penetration tester to get the list of vulnerabilities which he could potentially make use of to penetrate into the system. Thank you.